At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This podcast contains adult themes and language, and some of the things that we discuss may be disturbing to some listeners. In this podcast, we discuss sexual assault, torture, race, and murder. Listener discretion is advised. Please take care of yourself.
So now let's get into the timeline. So on March 31st, 1988, Marilyn Roberts Cardoza, 34 years old, went missing. She was known to have substance abuse issues. Her family thought that she had gone to the West Coast to live with a relative, but later learned that she had never left the New Bedford area.
The following month, Robin Bobby Lynn Rhodes went missing. The 28-year-old mother was last seen in New Bedford in April of 1988. She was drug dependent but never involved in sex work and was friends with several of the other victims.
For a short period of time, New Bedford attorney Kenneth Ponte dated Bobby Lynn Rhodes. He was a local boy who had received a pardon for a drug possession arrest and then became a lawyer. Ponte was known for doing drugs. And every source said that about him.
Yeah.
And for his connections to 3 of the victims, all of which he represented in court proceedings.
Ponte also had a relationship with another victim, Rochelle Clifford Dopirala. On April 3rd, 1998, Ponte had an altercation with a man named Roger Swire, who Rochelle alleged had raped her. During the altercation, Ponte pulled a firearm, and he was arrested.
Whoa! Rochelle, a 28-year-old Falmouth resident, was last seen in New Bedford on April 27th, 1988. Rochelle was, of course, a witness in the case against Roger Swire, the man she said had raped her. She was last seen with her friend's boyfriend, Frankie John Pina. More on him later.
Christina Montero, a 19-year-old with substance abuse issues, was last seen in New Bedford in May of 1988. Her mother's fiancé was a Dartmouth police officer. She has never been located and remains missing.
On May 27th, Deborah Medeiros, a 30-year-old from Fall River, disappeared from New Bedford. Also in the same month, Deborah Lynn McConnell, a 25-year-old mother from Newport, Rhode Island, went missing from New Bedford.
In June, this is all in 1988, so it's like one right after the other.
Quick
after the
succession.
other. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
In June, Marilyn Roberts Cardoza, who had gone missing in March, was reported missing by her father, a retired police officer. Marilyn has never been found.
On July 3rd, 1988, the first body was found. It was the 4th of July weekend, and a motorist who had stopped to relieve herself came upon the partially clothed, unrecognizable corpse. A bra was around its neck, about 30 feet from the road, on northbound Route 140 in Freetown. Freeway 140 comes up a lot in the story. The victim was not identified until December of 1988, and that was Deborah Medeiros.
Less than a week later, on July 7th, Nancy Lee Pava went missing. She had no involvement in sex work, but had a history of substance abuse and was in a very difficult domestic violence situation with a heroin dealer named Frankie Pina. Frankie was an ex-convict and the only suspect that we know of who was a person of color.
Nancy was last seen after walking out of Whispers Pub in the south end of New Bedford after having an argument with Frankie. Frankie later reported her missing to the New Bedford police. Police knew him well, as he had many run-ins with the police involving drugs and domestic violence. So it's notable that he would go to the police to report somebody missing.
Yeah, because he probably didn't want to do that.
Yeah. So it must have been serious.
But Frankie lived with Nancy Paiva and Rochelle Doperla, and he was the last person to see Rochelle alive on April 27th, 1988. He was also with Nancy Paiva before she went missing on July 7th, so he was a suspect.
On July 11th, 1988, Deborah Greenlaw DeMello, 35 years old, went missing from New Bedford. She had walked away from a prison work release program in Rhode Island on June 18th, 1988, and ended up in New Bedford. Deborah had a history of sex work, and she also had a history that included substance abuse.
On July 16th, 1988, Mary Rose Santos was last seen dancing at the Old Quarterdeck Lounge in New Bedford in the early morning hours. The day she disappeared, she went shopping for a gown to wear to a church ceremony to renew wedding vows with her husband, Donald.
Donald had dropped her off earlier that day near the downtown bus station, and witnesses said she had planned to walk to a friend's apartment nearby before she went missing. Mary Rose was known to have struggled with substance abuse.
Less than a month after the first body was found, on July 30th, a second body turned up. Two men on motorcycles found the remains on the westbound side of I-195 in Dartmouth, about 1.5 miles east of the Reed Road exit. She was identified in December 1988 as Nancy Paiva. Nancy left behind 2 teenage daughters.
Sandra Botello, 25, was last seen in New Bedford on August 11th, 1988, after leaving her apartment around 11 p.m. She was known to be involved in sex work, and she had substance abuse issues. Frankie Pina was incarcerated in July of 1988 on unrelated crimes and was still in prison when Sandra went missing.
So he could not have done anything to her. Yeah. In August and September of 1988, New Bedford police detective John Dextradur was investigating homicide and property crimes when he took an interest in solving assaults on sex workers. Detective Dextradur was the first person to notice that women were going missing at an alarming rate, and the similarities in the backgrounds of the missing young women.
That's crazy, because this all started in what, February?
No,
March?
it was
April?
March.
Yeah. So 6 months later.
5 or 6 months, yeah.
Yeah, somebody finally noticed. He made a list of missing women he thought were related, contacted the district attorney's office, and set up a meeting to make a pitch for a task force. His hunch regarding the women turned out to be true. Almost every single woman on his list turned up dead along a highway. Now we're getting somewhere.
The last woman to go missing was 25-year-old Dawn Mendez on September 4th, 1988. She had a history of sex work and substance abuse. Dawn is the only black victim that I can tell, although some of the other victims might be ethnically ambiguous. Dawn was last seen in New Bedford walking from her South End apartment heading to a family christening party.
On October 10th, 1988, attorney Kenneth Ponte closed his law office and moved to Port Richey, Florida. Yay! Although this raised suspicions with law enforcement, he had been talking about moving to Florida for a year.
So take that how you will. On November 8th, 1988, the body of Deborah DeMello was found just off the off-ramp to the I-195 eastbound Reed Road exit in Dartmouth by a state highway crew. Her remains were concealed by trees and her clothes were strewn in nearby tree branches. She was actually found with some of the belongings of Nancy Paiva, and she was identified in December of 1988. So that's kind of a weird one. I mean, obviously these two murders are connected.
Obviously, yeah.
Yeah. One was found.
Her stuff?
Yeah, with the other victim's stuff.
Mm-hmm. And nearby where the other body was found.
Oh, yeah. A lot of these bodies are being found also at the Reed Road exit.
They're in clusters.
Eastbound or southbound at I-195.
Mm-hmm. On November 29th, the body of Dawn Mendez was found on westbound Reed Road ramp off I-195 by a search dog, and she was identified days later.
On December 1st, Deborah Lynn McConnell was found off Route 140 northbound in Freetown by a search dog. She was found nude with a bra wrapped around her neck. She was last seen by her family in May of 1988 and was identified in March of 1989.
On December 10th, the body of Rochelle Clifford Dopirala was discovered in a gravel pit off Reed Road in Dartmouth, about 2 miles from Route 195 by hunters riding ATVs. She had been beaten to death. Her partially clothed remains were positively identified later that month.
A lot of the victims, they couldn't tell what happened to them.
Yeah, the cause of death or even their race.
Yeah.
Which was crazy.
The remains of Bobby Lynn Rhodes were found on March 28, 1989, along Route 140 southbound in Freetown by a Connecticut State Police canine. Her remains were positively identified in April of 1989.
On March 31st, 1989, the body of Mary Rose Santos was found by 2 boys about 25 feet from Route 88 southbound in Westport. She was identified soon after she was found. The remains of Sandra Botello were found by a highway work crew on April 24th, 1989, along I-195 in Marion. Her remains were positively identified that same month. So now we are going to get into the investigation and the arrest.
No arrest.
Hit it, Beth. Oh, wait. No arrest. Just the investigation.
The investigation and no arrest.
No arrest. That's right. It's unsolved. Hit it, Beth.
The principal investigators were State Police Detectives Jose Gonsalves and Marianne Dill, and Detective Richard Ferreira of the New Bedford Police Department. State Detectives Gonsalves and Dill went from town to town investigating local murders along with local police. So I guess they were helping the local police.
We don't always see that, so that's good.
No, yeah, that is good.
Yeah. Gonsalves said, quote, "After the third body was found, Marianne and I knew there was a serial killer around, and John Dextradur was right all along," unquote.
During the investigation, one name kept popping up, that of New Bedford attorney Kenneth Ponte. He'd represented some of the women in court. Nancy had worked in his video rental shop. Don had once been seen banging on the door of his house, where Rochelle had also stayed. He had relationships with both Robin and Rochelle.
Ponte has been described as an eccentric character. Have you seen video
to
of
say
him?
the least.
Yeah.
I haven't seen video, but I can only imagine.
Yeah, no, it's almost like he doesn't know he's being videotaped because he's like pushing people and like.
Oh my God.
So to see these words, I'm like, oh, he seemed like a hothead.
Yeah.
A reformed heroin addict, heavy cocaine user, low-level lawyer, low-rent lawyer, and deputy sheriff of Bristol County who carried a gun. And my understanding is he didn't use it wisely.
The way that he should.
In the way that he should. And investigators were told Ponte was, quote, a bit weird, unquote.
He often invited sex workers to his house for drugs and was known for bouts of paranoia. Throughout the investigation, there were rumors of snuff films being made locally, and one woman claimed Ponte had watched a pornographic video in which a woman being strangled looked dead.
Wow. So, Kenneth Ponte was District Attorney Ronald A. Pena's prime suspect.
The truth about the Haditha massacre has been covered up, but not anymore.
I know you know what happened.
They went into houses and killed women and children.
What are you thinking?
What a mess.
U.S. Marines murdered innocent civilians in cold blood.
And at the center of it all
is 25-year-old Sergeant Frank Wuderick.
and me. Murder in House 2, a new podcast from Crowd Network.
Hey, podcast listeners, I'm Paul Brandis introducing my podcast, Countdown to Dallas. It's a fascinating, in-depth look at the seemingly unconnected events that led to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It's based on my book of the same title. In that book and in this podcast, I go all the way back to 1939, when Lee Harvey Oswald was born into a troubled and dysfunctional family. I'll follow his transient and often violent teenage years and young adulthood, painting a fuller picture of the man who would later become Kennedy's killer. I also take a look at events unfolding in that era, like Cuba and Vietnam, and I'll unpack the conspiracy theories too, not one of which has ever been conclusively proven. Subscribe to Countdown to Dallas at evergreenpodcasts.com or your favorite listening app, October 31st.
And on January 18th, 1989, Ponte returned to New Bedford Superior Court after a grand jury indicted him on the gun charge from April 1988.
Yeah, that was when he attacked the guy who his girlfriend, Rochelle,
said
had raped her.
Yes.
And then Ponte went to Florida, so he came back because he was indicted.
Thank you, friend, for putting it all together.
There's a lot of information.
Lot of details. Yeah, no, and I'm going to be honest, like, when we started this, I watched so many YouTube videos today, and even though I've been researching this case for the past week, I still feel like there's so much.
Yeah, there's so much more.
I feel
like I was going to say, I feel like I could research this for weeks.
This would
and
take,
I still wouldn't know.
It could be a whole Game of Thrones saga. I mean, it's like it could be multiple seasons. I mean, multiple interviews of people. There's just so much to it.
There's a lot.
Which leads me to my hot take too early. Why didn't they do any of that before? To help solve it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right. So back to the story. Then in May of 1989, Anthony DeGrazia, a 26-year-old construction worker, was identified by a woman who said he'd attacked her, and he was identified by means of a photo provided by a young, inexperienced detective. And he was charged with 4 counts of rape, 6 counts of assault and battery, and 1 count of assault with intent to rape.
These charges stemmed from attacks on sex workers during the same time frame that the disappearances were occurring. However, this woman, who identified him as her attacker, said he looked like her attacker. It doesn't sound like she was very positive.
Yeah, and it sounds like
investigators were grasping at straws.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
DeGrazia was unable to pay bail and spent the next 13 months in the county jail on allegations brought against him by DA Ronald Pena. DeGrazia was finally released on bond on June 27th, 1990.
Immediately afterwards, he was rearrested for allegedly uttering threats against DA Pena for wrongful prosecution and imprisonment. DeGrazia again posted bond and was re-released. DeGrazia was interviewed by the grand jury but was never charged.
A grand jury did return an indictment against Kenneth Ponte, and on August 17, 1990, Ponte was arraigned on a single count of murder, that of Rochelle Doperla. The indictment accused Ponte of beating Rochelle to death on April 27, 1988.
Ponte entered a not guilty plea and was released on $500,000 bond. DA Pena suggested that Ponte killed Doperla because she was allegedly planning on exposing Ponte's drug activities. Spoiler alert, everybody already knew, but a special prosecutor was appointed to look into all of the evidence against him, could find nothing that could be used to convict him.
That September, a new district attorney, Paul F. Walsh, Jr., was elected, and on July 29, 1991, Walsh dropped the murder charge against Ponte. The DA's office announced the murder charges against Ponte were dismissed due to lack of evidence. Paul V. Buckley, an independent prosecutor, said the grand jury had indicted Ponte on a, quote, fishing expedition, unquote.
On July 27, 1991, Anthony DeGrazia was found dead outside his ex-girlfriend's home in Freetown. His death was ruled a homicide by Freetown police, who were the first to arrive on the scene. The district attorney's office later ruled his death a suicide, but the autopsy report ruled DeGrazia's death a homicide.
So yeah, it's always reported that it was a suicide, but it doesn't sound like they knew for sure.
Yeah.
Because the autopsy said it was a homicide, but the DA is saying that it's a suicide. I don't know.
Just, it doesn't make any sense. That's all.
No. And if it was a homicide, it wasn't investigated.
Thank you. Yeah.
In a public broadcast, Special Prosecutor Paul Buckley stated that it was a, quote, timely thing, unquote, that DeGrazia took his own life after being made aware that he was now being considered the prime suspect in connection to the New Bedford Highway Killings case. Later, this statement was retracted by the DA's office, but I think that they were trying to close the case.
Real bad. Real bad. Yeah. Grasping at straws, don't have enough evidence, but let's just say this guy who killed himself
First of all, let's say he killed himself. And then we'll say he did it.
Thank you. Even better characterization of what I believe happened, which is police messy-hoedness fuckery. So DA Paul Walsh and 2 of the original investigators believed DeGrazia was the highway killer. And by taking his own life, it was an admission of guilt. When has that ever been true? But no evidence was ever presented that linked DeGrazia to the rapes or assaults he was charged with. Nor has there ever been any evidence produced by DA's office connecting DeGrazia to the highway killings.
So I'm not saying it's impossible that he was the murderer, but there's no evidence. We haven't seen the evidence, is what I'm reading.
That's fine, but I also think there's evidence to suggest that the police department and the community really wanted this case to be solved.
Oh, for sure.
Would have done
they wanted to pin
anything to do that. Yeah.
Yep, I agree. Roger Swire, the man that Rochelle Doperla accused of rape, was ruled out as the killer, as was Frankie Pina. Some of the theories are that the perpetrator is now in jail or he died, and that's why he stopped killing. Or maybe he moved away and is killing someplace else.
Okay. I love theories. My mouth actually literally just started watering. New Bedford has a sizable Portuguese community, and many of the highway victims were of Portuguese ancestry. There is a theory that the New Bedford serial killer is also the Lisbon, as in the capital of Portugal, the Lisbon Ripper, a serial killer in Lisbon, Portugal, who murdered sex workers.
In 2011, Jose Pedro Guedes confessed to murdering 3 of the women in Lisbon attributed to the Lisbon Ripper. But he has never been charged because the statute of limitations had run out. That's crazy.
It is. And it's only 15 years in Portugal.
In Portugal. Yeah. And there's no evidence that Guedes ever lived in the U.S.
In 2015, serial killer Daniel Tavares was found guilty of the 1988 stabbing death of Gail Botelho, a 32-year-old single mother of 3 who lived across the street from him in Fall River, Massachusetts. There is speculation that he could be the New Bedford Highway serial killer.
Another theory presented the possibility that the murders were connected to the production of snuff films. We touched on that earlier. It was rumored that one or several of the victims were involved in the casting of these films. This theory was dismissed by investigators because there was no evidence to support it. And it sounds like it was just a rumor going around town.
Yeah. Some people think the Connecticut River Valley Killer and the New Bedford Highway Killer are one and the same. The Connecticut River Valley Killer was responsible for at least 7 murders of young women in New Hampshire and Vermont between 1978 and 88.
Yeah, and, the timeline kind of matches up.
Yeah.
But the victimology is definitely different. The victims in that case were not similar to these ones.
Gotcha.
They were not sex workers and
a more vulnerable, marginalized population of people.
They were hitchhikers or women on their own, not necessarily sex workers or people with substance abuse issues. So Maureen Boyle was a reporter who covered the highway murders at the time they were happening, and she wrote a book about the unsolved murders called Shallow Graves: The Hunt for the New Bedford Highway Serial Killer. She has said that multiple theories abound regarding the killings, and the size of the suspect pool is frightening.
Oh, no. Frightening?
She said, frightening. She said, quote, "You have to step back and realize, oh my God, there are so many people who could be capable of doing this. It's really terrifying." unquote.
Yeah, I'll say it. Try doing a podcast for 6 or 7 years about this stuff. It is terrifying.
Terrifying,
Whoa.
yeah.
Now, although the serial killings predated DNA technology in 2008, some of the evidence was sent to the FBI for testing. Oh, my favorite part. The results are now stored in a federal database waiting for potential match that would alert authorities. So,
hopefully, cross your fingers.
Fingers crossed. So now let's get into where are they now? Tell us, Beth.
Kenneth Ponte blamed authorities for ruining his career, and his life went into a tailspin after he was accused of murder. In May of 1997, Ponte was disbarred for using $12,000 of a client's insurance settlement for personal use. In 2009, law enforcement obtained a search warrant for Ponte's former home.
Now, this warrant was only for the driveway and a concrete slab patio. And the patio was poured around the time that the women began to disappear. It was rumored Christine Montero was buried underneath that patio, but no evidence was discovered. The excavation was publicized and ignited rage among some victims' family members who viewed it as a publicity stunt.
In May of 2007, Ponte was arrested for shoplifting.
Oh.
A month earlier, an affidavit filed by his sister alleged that he'd threatened to kill his mother, his sister, and himself in a fight over money. And then on January 26, 2010, Ponte was found dead at home. The cause of death was ruled natural, although significant drug paraphernalia was found with his body.
On September 25th, 2019, Frankie Pena, 68 years old, was arrested during a traffic stop in Dennis, Massachusetts. He was taken into custody after officers found what they believed to be cocaine inside of his vehicle. Pena was arrested and charged with possession with intent to distribute. So he must have had a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
Pena was arraigned and held on bail. We could not find any information about what happened after that, like a trial or anything, but as far as we can tell, he is currently incarcerated at a Massachusetts correctional institution.
I'm sorry, I have to go on a tangent, but I imagine a Massachusetts correctional institution to be like a nice place.
A country club?
Yeah, like that. Is that where Martha Stewart went too? That's what it sounds like.
It does sound like that. It's just Massachusetts, yeah.
It sounds like I'm picturing leaves changing
nice.
in the fall.
Yeah.
And sweaters and cardigans. That's what they do during rec time is make cardigans and wrap them. I don't know. I've watched too much
sound
TV.
Nice.
It sounds
I agree.
nice, okay?
But it probably
it's
sucks.
Probably terrible.
Yeah.
So the murders remain unsolved, and the families of the victims are still searching for closure. The cases are all featured on the Unsolved Cases pages of the Bristol County District Attorney's Office website. There is a film about this case currently in production called The Highway Murders, but it's been in production since 2016, so who knows when it'll ever come out, and we hope the energy continues to get the story out.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope it does come out.
For sure.
According to the reporter Maureen Boyle, the state police cold case unit are still following up on leads and tips from the public. She says that just because the public doesn't hear anything doesn't mean the investigation isn't continuing. Boyle said investigators have to be careful not to tip off the suspect and that you, quote, don't want to identify innocent people who may be drawn into the case, unquote.
Wait, like they did already?
Yep, like they did already.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Commercial Insurance. Business owners, meet Progressive Insurance. They make it easy to get discounts on commercial auto insurance and find coverages to grow with your business. Quote in as little as 6 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company. Coverage provided and serviced by affiliated and third-party insurers. Discounts and coverage selections not available in all states or situations.
Detective Gonsalves said he regrets the right person was not arrested, and he has doubts the case will ever be solved. Wow, way to CYA. So you never have to solve the case. It's just never going to be solved, folks. Sorry, it's unsolvable.
Well, he's retired.
Okay, well, even more lucky for him, I suppose. Quote, "We did the best job we could. It's sad for me it wasn't solved. Not for me, not for Marianne, but for the victims. I just feel like we let the families down," unquote.
Retired Detective Richard Ferreira of the New Bedford Police Department said his eyes still wander to the woodlines when he drives on local highways, his mind recalling the bodies found not far from the highways. He says law enforcement was not prepared for what they investigated.
Because there weren't murders in that town, so I get that.
Right. They just never had that happen before.
Not like that.
Not like that, yeah.
Quote, "In hindsight, none of us had enough experience, if any, in serial killing investigations. It's a lot more different than a regular homicide investigation. We did the best we could. We didn't have the training or experience to do it the way it should have been done," unquote. Wow, that's a heck of an admission.
Yeah.
So now let's get into our hot takes. If you are with us, Fruities in the chat, feel free to chime in. We'd love to have your hot takes be part of this recording.
Yeah.
But while Beth and I are sharing ours, just feel free to type away and we'll get to them. Beth, what do you think about this case?
Well, the last woman to go missing was Dawn Mendez, who went missing on September 4th, 1988, then nothing after that. DeGrazia wasn't arrested until May of 1989, and that's a big gap, 8 months.
Yeah.
For someone who was killing so frequently.
Right.
It was like 1 to 3 women a month.
Staggering numbers.
Yeah. It makes me think something must have happened to the perp.
Oh.
Like they died
Yeah.
or, like I forget who said it, Maureen Boyle or somebody.
Got locked up.
Or moved away, which makes Ponte look good for it because he split for Florida in October, like the month after Dawn was found.
Right.
But honestly, I don't know if he did it or not. But my feeling is he didn't. He was just a part of the community.
Yeah.
He hung out with these women. They did drugs together, which is why he knew so many of them. They all kind of knew each other. I don't think it was a huge community. And same with Frankie Pina. He was also a part of that community.
Yeah.
And I have no idea who the perp was.
Yeah.
Like Maureen Boyle said, it could be anybody. There are so many suspects, even more than the ones we mentioned. And we could do a whole other episode to cover all of them.
Yeah, seriously.
But I do think it had to have been someone who lived in or around New Bedford, somewhere around there, because serial killers often stick to an area around where they live. It's convenient,
Yeah.
New Bedford was the hunting ground, and then he would leave the bodies somewhere near where he lived.
Right.
And on that note, I think it probably was a white guy.
I think so, too.
Just because of the demographics. But who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows?
You know what I think? I think it was a truck driver who was from New Bedford. And then maybe he just got a new route, or he moved or got arrested and died.
Yeah.
But I think you're on to somebody, that it was probably a regular white guy from the community, familiar with everything. Heck, in my mind, he probably was like helping with the searches. Probably taking
and maybe
casseroles.
Not even one of the suspects.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? I mean, what was it? D'Amelio was a member of, is that D'Amelio, the Golden State guy, was part of the police force. What if it was somebody on the police force?
Yeah. I can't remember what his name is, but the Golden State Killer.
The Golden State guy. Yeah.
Wasn't he a fire? Oh, no, he was a police officer.
Yeah, I thought he was a police officer. And
yeah, I think he was.
Yeah. And so, I also have hope because the Golden State rapist and the Golden State Killer case went unsolved for so long.
Yeah.
And then the right people heard about it, and the right people got the information, and then something happened,
they were able
and
to
we
solve it.
found, and these cases were solved. So even though this has been unsolved for 35 years, I do still have hope, even though, and this makes me sad, that even though they have some DNA and we have DNA advancements, that there's still no solid leads.
Yeah, and I don't know what the DNA is that they have. It might not be any good.
Yeah, that too. That makes me, it's all just, it's disappointing, but I only bring up the Golden State Killer case because for so long it was unsolved.
I thought it would never be solved.
And I just I discovered true crime and I discovered there's this unsolved case called the Golden State Killer case. It's never going to be solved. That's what I would have told you. And then it was.
Right.
So that's my hope, is that I'm wrong. A glaring detail about this case is the marginalized status of the victims.
Right.
And how so many lives were cut short so quickly, and the public didn't notice, the police didn't notice, the news didn't notice. And it just makes me forever frustrated that humanity isn't applied to these victims in the way that it should be. One of the sources I was looking into was talking about the struggles of one of the particular women that put them in the position of being in survival mode. Like maybe it was a divorce or a death of somebody that totally flipped her financial position upside down. And she found herself struggling to survive, but I don't think she engaged in sex work. Either way, what would you do if like all of a sudden financially you had nothing? You just
have to find a way to make some money.
You got to figure it out. And New Bedford is one of these really white privileged places with a really stark wealth gap. And so there's these people, the haves and the have-nots, who have to, drive these people's cars, wash these people's cars, watch their kids, clean their homes. You're like, they interact, but they don't see each other. And so when something bad happened to the have-nots, the haves didn't have to notice.
Right.
And that bothers me. 11 victims in 6 months? That's a lot.
Yeah, that's nuts.
And I'm going to steal a phrase from our pals over at the Missing and Murdered Project, that your economic status, your station in life, your occupation, your race, your gender should not be determining factors if you deserve to be safe from harm. And all the isms allowed this to go on for too long. And unfortunately, because of the timing and the duration, not enough evidence was preserved for us to be able to have solved it by now.
Right.
I was also curious about the pop culture of it all because it was the 80s. And I'd never seen The Accused, but Halloween 4 came out that year. Mystic Pizza, I've heard of it. Heathers.
I remember that, yeah. So Mystic Pizza, I know that one because I lived in Connecticut, and Mystic is in Connecticut. It's also a port town. I'd been there to look at like the chips and stuff.
Oh, you have? That's so fun.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, I can't wait to read your book or watch the documentary about you and Minnie. Like, you lived so many places. You done so many things. I can't wait. You don't have to spill all the tea now, but I was thinking of what was the culture at the time. I didn't see The Accused, but I saw the trailer, and it really, like, in the end, did Jodie Foster get her justice?
I'm not going to tell you.
God damn it. Well, here's my theory, is that in movies, the vulnerable victims do get justice, but in real life, vulnerable victims never do.
So the result of that case, there were 6 men, and I think 4 of them were found guilty, and 2 of them were not.
Okay. Okay.
If memory serves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't remember what happened in the movie. I just remember mainly it was about how the victims are treated. Because during that time, especially, there was a big discussion about, was she asking for it?
Yeah.
And stuff like that. And so the phrase the accused is talking about, she's being accused, although she's accusing these men, it's just kind of a play on words.
Yeah. But it's just an interesting, there's no coincidences. I believe timing is always divine. And it seems like divine timing that this story would be inserted into the zeitgeist, this movie, at the same time that this is all happening.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know, eerie?
And, that story happened a few years before this happened. So it's all kind of together.
So that's it for my take. But I do see Bryn has a couple of takes in the chat on the whaling. And super terrible, several whale species lost 90% of their populations. because we talked about the whaling situation.
Right.
And yes, it was industrialization that was the problem.
Yeah.
And Bryn feels like a candidate for genetic genealogy.
Yeah, this story.
Yes, please. Hello, where is everybody? And it also reminds her of the Gilgo Beach murders.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Definitely.
I'm sorry, Bryn. I'm doing this sound effect for your hot take. Yeah, your hot take deserves that air horn.
It also reminds me of the Gilgo Beach murders in that maybe if they do solve it and they find out who did it, it might be somebody we never heard of that nobody ever suspected. Just like with the Gilgo Beach murders.
Yes. Oh, dang.
Bryn said someone call Paul Holes.
Seriously, is he on this? Somebody send him an email right now. We actually know Paul, so we should see. I don't know. Maybe we could reach out and see.
Well, we don't know him. We've met him.
Yeah, we've met him. Yeah, I take that back. We've met him a couple of times. Conversed, but we're small time. We're small potatoes, and he's a big
he'd be
one.
like, who the hell are you?
Hooligan. But I am curious if there are like old retired investigators like him on this, because this is like one of those old ones that should have been solved.
Should be solved, yeah.
So, Fruities, let us know what you think in the comments or get at us. Beth, where can the people find us?
Our website is fruitloopspod.com, and we use Fruit Loops Pod for all of our social media.
This is a weekly podcast, and new episodes drop every Thursday. So until next time, look alive, y'all. It's crazy out there.
Ohio is a land of mystery, from missing shipwrecks and lost treasure beneath her surface to strange phenomenon slicing through her skies. From myths that have evolved around historic events and people to the unsolved murders and disappearances that keep her communities wondering what happened. Find Ohio Mysteries on your favorite podcast app, and let's explore the inexplicable. OhioMysteries.com.
I want to take a moment to tell you about my podcast, Carol Costello Presents Blind Rage. In 1984, a woman named Phyllis Cottle was abducted in broad daylight, tortured, and left to die in a burning car in Akron, Ohio. At the time, I was a rookie reporter covering this horrific story. Since then, I've reported every kind of crime imaginable. I've been able to leave most of them at work, but not this one, the one that buried itself under my skin and stayed put. Phyllis Cottle was a badass woman, and I want to tell you her story. A production of Evergreen Podcasts and signature title of the Killer Podcast Network, you can find Carol Costello Presents Blind Rage wherever you get your podcasts. Discover more great true crime and paranormal programming at killerpodcast.com.